Hello, I'm Bud McCord. I'm here in Brazil, South America. Welcome to Food for Thought. We're in John's Gospel. We're looking at Jesus through the eyes of his disciples. We're trying to imagine together what it would have been like to have been discipled by Jesus, to see him, to hear him, to be loved by him, to begin to love him back because he first loved us, and what it would have been like for them to live Jesus out in their experience and in their lives. We have John's Gospel for this purpose, to be able to understand exactly how Jesus discipled his first disciples. We're in John chapter 5. I want to read again the same story we read. I'm going to read a part of the story that we read on Friday. And this is a Monday. We're beginning a new week. And I want to go back to this particular passage. I think it's worth taking another look and another listen to what Jesus did and what he said. It says this: after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years, or he was paralyzed for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been in that condition for a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" Keep that thought in mind. Do you want to be made well? The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. I want us to look at a few things. And this is how discipleship works. We see Jesus in action. We understand this. The very first thing, nothing Jesus did was accidental. And nothing that Jesus did was without a very clear purpose. And nothing that Jesus said was just an opinion. When John said that they observed Jesus, he became flesh and dwelt among us, and that we beheld his glory full of grace and truth. Grace and truth are never accidental. And they're never just ideas. They're conclusions. So when we look at whatever Jesus does or says, we should take it 100% serious. There is a reason for what he did. There's a reason for what he said, and what he did and what he said reveals God's grace, and it reveals truth. Now let's go back to the story for a second and look for a few things. We can certainly see his grace because he is under no obligation to go to this place where they're gathered together, perhaps hundreds of very sick, chronically sick, deathly sick people gathered. But the scriptures say that he came unto his own. He came unto his own. So Jesus, during this whole book of John, and in the 3.5 years coming up to his crucifixion, he kept coming back to Israel. He kept coming back to Israel. He kept coming back to Israel. I think, and this is an opinion, an observation as a disciple, I believe that when he came into the pool at Bethesda, where he came into that place, it's a picture of something much, much bigger. I believe that this one particular man represents the state of Israel, or the condition in which the nation was among many nations. I think it's a picture of Jesus coming to Israel, but also coming to all the sick nations of the world. And he makes the question for Israel, the question that he makes for this man, do you want to be well? Do you want to be well? When Jesus uses the word well, he means completely back to what you were meant to be. Do you want to be well? We know that he would like to get up off of that bed he's been in for 38 years. One of the reasons I believe this is a picture of the nation of Israel is because 38 years this man has been, in a sense, stopped in his tracks. Israel's history contains a span of time of 40 years in which the nation of Israel found itself paralyzed in the desert because they could not muster enough faith to go forward and be fully well. And so that generation that did not take its opportunity to go into the promised land in the Old Testament story parallels this man's situation. I don't think that's an accident. I don't think it's an accident where Jesus is in Jerusalem. I don't think it's an accident that this man is Jewish. I don't think it's an accident that he is in the middle of a whole bunch of sick people. Israel is a nation in the Old Testament that was chosen to be a blessing to all nations. And Jesus is that blessing, arriving in the midst of all the nations of the world. But he must manifest God's grace and truth to the nation of Israel first. We see that with Jesus continuously as he works his way toward Calvary. So let's look at it like this. Look at our world as it is right now. Israel continues to be, in a certain sense, an isolated people in the world, a hated people in the world many times. It makes no sense to me at all, but it happens to be a fact. And the invitation that gives to that great nation, that chosen nation, is, do you want to be well? But it's the same invitation that missionaries carry out into the world today as they go to all the nations to make disciples. And the question is the same question. Do you want to be made well? If Jesus himself showed up today in the nations of Africa or Asia or the Middle East or in the West or in Latin America, and he suddenly came into each nation and he saw them stuck, paralyzed, and we are paralyzed right now as a world. We are not advancing toward greater love, greater light, greater peace. We are in a very bad place, and our world has been in a very bad place, and it's been very sick ever since we lost the Garden of Eden. And this question is the question that missionaries carry, that evangelists carry, that every Christian should carry when we're talking to our neighbors who are also afflicted as we have been afflicted, unless we've already been made well by Jesus. Do you want to be well? How many nations do you think would say, yes, Jesus, heal us? And if Jesus did heal that nation, do you think everybody would be excited about it? I don't think so. Because when this man was healed, religion didn't want him healed on that day because it was a religious day. It seems to me that this is a small picture of what we're dealing with every single day. And that is that we, in and of ourselves, in sin, and he mentions to this man, don't sin again, or it might be worse than what happened the first time, which leaves us to understand that perhaps the reason that he was in the state that he was in, as he was out of the will of God, and when you're out of the will of God and you're sinning, love does not flow. And yet here stands Jesus, who is the flow of God's perfect love, and he asks the question, do you want to be well? And then the man says, I have no man. But wait a minute. There was a man standing in front of him, talking to him, who's saying, do you want to be well? And when he says, I have no man, I have no man, that Jesus just ignores what he says. And then he says, rise and take up your bed and walk. That's what Jesus is saying to this day, to the world. He's saying, do you want to be well? Now, this question can be made from one individual to another, or it can be made to a family, or it can be made to a community, or it can be made to a city, or it can be made to a government. And we who are believers in Jesus Christ, we are to be the voice that continues to ask this question, do you want to be well? The question is, do we really believe that this man, Jesus, can make all people well? All women well. All men well. All nations well. Do we really believe that Jesus is wanting us to understand that he came into this world and he was among many, many, many sick nations and among millions of sick individuals? But he first had to put the question to his family nation, Israel, which is linked all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he puts the question to this man, but really it's the question he would put to every man, every woman, every nation, every person. Do you want to be well? And by well, I don't think he means just helped a little, but restored to the fullness of what you were meant to be. That's a part of taking up the bed and walking. This man now has to assume responsibility for the movement of his life, for the progress of his life. He has been called away from whatever it was that paralyzed him to a movement in the direction of the will of God and the love of God. I think if you'll take the time to read the story, look for grace, look for truth, remember there are no accidents with Jesus and there's no doubt with Jesus. So you should be able to clearly see him being full of grace and full of truth. But then you can put yourself inside the story and let the Spirit of God reveal to you if Jesus is asking you the same question. Is Jesus asking your neighbor the same question? Or does Jesus want you to carry this question to the four corners of the world and say, do you want to be made well? And then ignore their answers and just keep taking them to Jesus until some of them say, yes, I want to be well. Yes, I want to move forward doing the will of God and being full of grace and full of truth, which means Christ formed in you. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Think on these things. They're very precious. They're wonderful. And I've said maybe 1% of what could be said. And that's only because I took the time to see him, hear him, let him love me, let me love him back, and want to live him and say to people, do you want to be made well? God bless you. Have a great day.